Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Well, we will, I think, go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Just a huge welcome to our alumni, parents, and friends who are joining us tonight. And, obviously, oh, Larry Jones, it's just really nice to see some faces here. Gosh almighty, it's nice to see you guys. So, welcome to all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Quentin McDowell. I'm the Associate Head of School for External Relations. Really, really thrilled that you're here, and thank you for making the time to be with us tonight. We're really, really excited to have Peg and Marca with us. Peg was actually slated to be our keynote speaker for the reunion in 2020, but obviously that got disrupted, and when she and Marca would have celebrated their 35th reunion. And so thank you, Peg, for sticking it out with us and joining us just 11 months after schedule, which is totally cool. Everything has been delayed in our house. We always say due to COVID. So due to COVID, we've had to delay. We use that excuse for many, many different things in our house, even if it has no relation to COVID. And we're really, really excited to hear about the incredible work and the story you're going to share with us tonight about what you've been doing and do. And just a couple of housekeeping items for everybody. So this session will be recorded so that we can make sure to share it with the rest of our alumni. And please, if you don't mind, while we're in this phase of our presentation, stay muted. That way we can keep focused and won't get the feedback and allow Peg and Marca to lead us through the conversation. You can, at the bottom of the screen, use the chat box to ask any questions you want during the presentation. We do want this to be conversational. So if you have things that pop into mind and something immediately strikes you, throw it out there. Marca is going to be our moderator tonight, and she'll gently interrupt and make sure that your questions get answered as needed and on time. And so we'll also, if you have an interest, you can raise your hand, or if you want to ask your question verbally, you're welcome to do that. Just let us know in the chat box, or you can, at the bottom of your screen, I believe, hit in the reactions, you can hit raise your hand, and we'll know that you're wanting to contribute a question. And just for those of you, it seems silly to say this because we've all spent so much time on Zoom over the past 13, 14 months, but if you look up in the top right-hand corner and you can see a couple little dots up there, if you want to click on that and hit speaker view, that might allow you to see the screen a little bit better, but you're welcome to stay in gallery view if that's what you're joining us. So really, really excited. Marca Armstrong Ewy, the class of 85, is going to lead us off and introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Peg. And so I'll turn things over to you, Marca, but I will certainly be jumping in wherever I can to ask questions and engage as we go along. But thanks you again for everyone to be here, as well as it's very special to have you both, Peg and Marca, here with us tonight. So take it away.
Thanks, Quentin. I appreciate that. And I'm super excited to be here. I wasn't nervous, and then I saw Larry Jones's face, and all of a sudden I felt like it was in 10th grade history all over again. So thank you, Jonesy, for disrupting my concentration. So in any event, I'm sure Peg probably has a little bit of that going on too. So Peg and I, both members of the class of 85. Peg is the founder and chief executive officer of the National Alliance for Safe Housing and its parent organization, the District Alliance for Safe Housing, known as NASH and DASH respectively. They're nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to ensuring access to housing for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So she's been doing some amazing work over the course of her past 30-year career, designing and delivering services for women and families and victims of crime to alleviate violence and homelessness. While a student at Mercersburg, Peg was a member of the Irving Society, a member of Madrigals and Chorale, so we were both in that together, and it's just lovely to see her here on the screen with me this evening, as well as the Chapel Choir. She acted in Stony Batter. Peg holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Massachusetts and a master's degree in social work from UPenn and a master's degree in business administration from Georgetown. So amazing career, and excited to have Peg here with us this evening to share her journey with all of you. And as Quentin said, I'll be monitoring to the chat. So please post questions as you have them. And Peg, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marca, and Quentin, and Jen, and everyone who has been part of helping to put this together. It's such an honor to be asked to speak tonight, and to have been asked to speak last year, which, even though we didn't get to do, it's I'm just flattered to be asked to talk a little bit about my work and talk with you all about DASH and NASH. So I have a PowerPoint slide or presentation that I'm going to pull up. Give me a minute. As I was sharing with Denise, my computer is a little old, so it might move slowly. Can everybody see this?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Let's get this started. So resilience savings. So we're going to be talking about resilience, but before we do, when I was asked to speak to a Mercersburg audience, of course, I had to go back and look through my yearbooks and just revisit my experience at the Berg. And it gratified me to see a picture of myself in the same candid position as other Mercersburg luminaries. So I just couldn't help but to share this picture. You know, for me, this was, if anybody recalls, they used to sell these ice cream cookie sandwiches in the dorms at night, and they were to die for. I don't think that's what Beno is eating here, but clearly the photographer had a way with capturing these candid moments. So let's jump in. So we're talking tonight about resilience, and one definition of that would be the ability to react, recover, and reimagine after an unexpected event. And obviously, we've all gotten personally acquainted with resilience in the last year because of the COVID pandemic, which has impacted our lives in ways that really none of us could anticipate. So we've reacted to those impacts, working from home, changing our social behaviors, coping with the consequences of the pandemic, which has been deeply felt by many people. And we're now beginning to recover from the trauma. And when you think about it, it has been traumatic for a lot of people just to have to uproot our lives and start doing things differently all of a sudden, right? And ways that we just couldn't have predicted. And in fact, a lot of us are now beginning to reimagine what the world might look like post-COVID and how things might be different permanently. And this is really not uncommon from what survivors of domestic and sexual violence experience in their lives as well. So I've had the great privilege of working in the field of domestic violence and housing and services for most of my career. And founding DASH was really the pinnacle of that journey. When I founded DASH in Washington, D.C., there were only 48 beds in crisis shelters for women and children escaping violence. And this is in a city of almost 750,000 people. So there really was very little available safe housing. And many survivors were being turned away from programs because of various requirements, meaning that a lot of them who needed a safe place to go couldn't get one. So our mission for DASH was to provide access to safe housing and services for survivors as they worked to rebuild their lives on their own terms. And we really envisioned a culture where safe housing is a human right shared by everyone. So what do we mean when we talk about safe housing? Well, safe housing is what we're talking about is housing that ensures survivors have access to the means to be safe, stable, and self-determining. And that may sound like a lot to ask for it from just housing. The key to all of this is that we allow survivors to have a place where they can stabilize, regroup, and move forward. In other words, to be resilient from the violence that they've experienced, so that they can turn attention to the things that matter most to them when they're not having to cope with violence and do it on their own terms. And first and foremost, what we hear from survivors is that they want to be able to focus on their families and their communities. And that's what we want to enable them to do. I have a video here. We tested this before, and I am super hoping that this works. So talk amongst yourselves. There we go. So this will give you an idea, a little bit of what DASH is about. And hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
We have new information about move-in dates.
Yes?
It's Tiffany.
On the side.
I'm really feeling good, and I'm anxious, and I'm ready to go get my children so they can see the new location, so they can see that they do have a bed, and let them know that we're in a safe place.
Yay, stop. Yes.
Because we are a low barrier voluntary services program, it basically means that we don't put a lot of rules and restrictions on the women when they're living in our housing.
I want peace. For the last 25 years, you couldn't even get me to smile. If I smile, it was like, okay. But now I'm happy, I smile, I laugh, I grin. It's just peace.
I know my long-term goals is to get permanent housing and finish school.
We're advocating for the women. We're helping them to become stronger and to make their own decisions about their lives and get back on their feet.
I've become more responsible, a better parent. My self-esteem has really risen.
I'd like to think that, in the end, what we've accomplished is that the woman has taken power and control over her own life that she didn't have previously.
I called 7 numbers and no one picked up but Dash, and I'm really glad Dash answered their phone, because I don't really, it's other good programs out here, but Dash really don't make you feel smothered, they make you feel free.
So that should give you a sense. And so really at its most basic, what we say is that housing fosters resilience. Our theory of change is that when survivors, regardless of their situations or their circumstances, are provided with safe housing wherever they seek it, that they're given the means, and then they're given the means to be self-determining and define for themselves how they want to move forward with their lives, then they will establish safety and stability for themselves and their families, which creates healing from trauma. So again, safe housing, we believe, enables that healing. But meanwhile, as we were running DASH over the course of years, there was this trend happening across the country. Few major things. There was a growing affordable housing crisis in Washington, D.C., and really nationwide. Survivors were increasingly turning to homeless housing programs because of a lack of available safe housing options. And survivors were becoming homeless, in other words, living on the streets or in their cars, or returning to abusive situations when they had nowhere else to go. So we knew that this wasn't just a problem that was limited to Washington, D.C. In fact, as we learned over the years, the intersection of domestic violence and housing instability is really pretty complicated. We know that 84% of residents in domestic violence shelters across the country have reported that they need help finding affordable housing. That up to 3 in 4 homeless women cite domestic violence as the major contributor to their homelessness. So we know that it's a primary cause for why women, and especially women with children, become homeless. And that housing instability is 4 times more likely for women who experience domestic or sexual violence. So what we have really come to understand is that this is a cycle of housing instability that's born of domestic and sexual violence. It doesn't just stop when a survivor leaves a home where they've been experiencing violence. What we know is that survivors may become homeless because of domestic or sexual violence, but that they're also increasingly vulnerable to being victimized when they become homeless, and that they have a harder time securing safe and affordable housing as they're trying to exit homelessness and violence, either because of discrimination or coercive control by partners. So we know, for instance, that for survivors, housing is a huge consideration in decision-making about whether or when to leave an abusive situation. And for very good reason, because a shelter is not the end-all be-all for survivors trying to get out of abusive situations. And they know that as well as we do. Okay, so sorry, I wanted to get ahead of myself. So the other point that I want to make is that resilience is dynamic. It's a process, right? We have spent the last year dealing with COVID and really processing through all of the changes that it has wrought on our lives. And it's not something that you just sort of start here and then you move to this next step and the next step. A lot of times it's a cyclical process. For survivors, they are always trying to make their lives better, whether we're aware of how they're trying to do that or not. We know that they're always trying to make their lives better. And the repercussions of violence can last for a long time, even after survivors get out of abusive situations. And the longer that survivors go without safety and housing stability, the higher the cost is to them and their communities. So let me give you another viewpoint. One of the survivors we work.
He came in and he beat me. I called the police and they began to work with me right there. I stayed at a hotel for 28 days. They helped me with transportation and food. I ended up with the DASH program, in which they placed me in housing. I have a 1-bedroom apartment. It's very, very beautiful, and God blessed me so that it was possible for me to be by myself while I'm healing in my brand new apartment here at DASH, and I'm just very, very excited.
There are victims out there who have a variety of different needs, and that all of them need help with getting into safe housing and getting support to be able to move forward in a way that's purposeful for them. And I've always thought that our program isn't really designed to churn out model citizens, that what we're trying to do is make sure that women don't get killed, and that they have the ability and the space to be able to move forward however it is that they want.
Can I ask you to answer a question? I mean, this is so powerful, but I'd love to hear, and I'm sure the participants would love to hear, when you meet somebody like this woman who you just shared, how long do you keep in touch with her? How long is she in your program? Because you talked about in that video, the idea here and the goal is survival, right?
Right.
So maybe you can talk a little bit. I know you have such a wonderful story, but perhaps you could maybe just speak to that while you pick up your next point.
Sure. So the program at DASH is available to provide housing for survivors up to 24 months free of rent. Because again, we know that so many of the women and families that we serve don't have the means or are in the process of getting back on their feet and need really that time and space to be able to put the resources together in order to be able to move forward with their lives. So we wanted to give them as much time as possible to be able to do that. What was interesting, what we found, was that the average length of stay, it sounds like, sort of a dream come true, like 2 years of free housing. But the average length of stay was actually about 18 months in the program. And when we talked to the women that we served, what we heard was a few things. Many of them had, sort of had plans in place when they first came to us, and what they just needed in our program was a safe place to sort of launch for whatever their plans were to be able to move forward. So they didn't need all 24 months to do that. Other survivors told us that they knew that the housing landscape was so bad that they oftentimes would find other housing situations before their time was up, because they were anticipating being asked to leave at the end of 24 months, and they didn't want to be in a position where they didn't have any place else to go. So they would, work on finding another housing situation before that time came. And then we did have survivors who stayed up to 24 months, and some, even longer than that. And it was always difficult when we had someone who had been in the program for 24 or 30 months, and we had to say, you have to go now. We can't keep you here anymore, because we have to be able to bring in new survivors and new families. But we never just put them out on the street. Our aim was always to help them find another safe place to go.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions, or should I keep moving?
Why don't you keep moving? I'm monitoring the chat. So.
Okay. Great. So we had then the opportunity to start NASH, really because we started getting phone calls from programs around the country saying, how are you doing this at DASH? And we want to learn how to do it too. So we had the opportunity in 2015 to start NASH, really to work with other programs around the country to help sort of replicate what it is that we had developed at DASH, really to invest in survivors' resilience, build out safe housing systems, and support options for safe housing at the community level, with the idea that the work would increase community well-being when there's, and as well as survivors, when there's less homelessness because of domestic or sexual violence. So our mission at NASH is, you'll notice it's very similar to what we had at DASH, is to ensure that survivors of domestic and sexual violence have a full range of housing options through improved access, increased resources, and innovative services, ultimately catalyzing a safe housing movement. And our vision is the same, which is to create a world where safe housing is a human right shared by everyone. Our value proposition at NASH is a little different. What we propose to do at NASH is to create what we call safe housing equity. And that's increased value to all stakeholders, whether it's survivors, community members, family members, other people who invest in communities or who derive any kind of value that comes from safe housing. So we've been working to enhance the value of communities by reducing the impact of housing instability resulting from domestic and sexual violence. And in fact, when we look at comparing the costs for public services to address the needs of people who become homeless or who deal with domestic violence, when they don't have safe housing to go to, we actually find that the costs for safe housing are actually a whole lot less. So for instance, shelter and services for domestic violence yields a savings of about $8,300 when compared to a lack of shelter for survivors. And when we think of the costs, the kinds of costs that we're talking about for public services, emergency responder costs, criminal justice interventions, lost wages and tax income, hospitalization, health and mental health outcomes. So all of the things that we know that when problems like domestic violence or homelessness go unaddressed or unmet, that it yields a cost to the public to deal with those things. And when safe housing is put into place, it's actually that much less expensive. It's the same for the cost to house chronically homeless individuals, where you can realize a savings of more than $20,000 compared to the public services that are needed to take care of those individuals when they have no place else to go. And then even more so, when you provide vouchers for permanent affordable housing, the cost is an average of $14,000 as compared to $57,000 to address those families' needs when they become homeless or are left transient or with no place else to go.
Peg, we do have a question in terms of, DASH was focused on DC. That's where you started. When you launched NASH, could you speak to the communities that reached out to you and perhaps the ones that you're working with today across the country?
Sure. So when we first started NASH, we started out to do a national needs assessment so that we could get a sense of the landscape across the country. So while we had gotten individual questions from programs in like Indianapolis, San Francisco, Dallas, who were interested in adopting some of the practices that we had developed at DASH, when we got the initial funding to start NASH, we launched a national needs assessment just to understand what was happening nationwide and really to get a sense of how domestic violence and victim services programs are working with homeless and housing systems in order to make sure that they are partnering and preventing survivors from falling through the cracks. And what we learned through that assessment was that they weren't, that these two systems are so incredibly siloed that victim service providers really tend to not see themselves as housing providers, even though they run shelters and many of them run transitional housing programs. They don't really think of themselves as housing providers. And on the flip side, that homeless and housing programs don't see themselves as victim services programs, even though they deal with a lot of survivors and victims in their programs. So our major task has been trying to communicate to communities throughout the country how these two systems need to be working together. We have been working very intensively in the last few years with really major cities, Los Angeles, New York City, Miami. We've done some more work with Indianapolis, with Memphis, with Houston, San Francisco. But we're really hoping to expand our reach and be able to provide more targeted training and technical assistance to other communities who want to build out their safe housing systems.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So finally, we say that resilience builds community. So when we invest, in resilience and survivors' strength and ability to react, recover, and reimagine their lives when it's independent of violence and it's on their own terms, it builds community as much as it does to support individual survivors' lives and that of their families. And what we really hope is that NASH will be able to create a sustaining cycle of safe housing equity where systems change begets safe housing options, begets investment in survivors' lives, which further begets systems change, et cetera. So we're really, as I said before, sort of focused on targeting those community interventions so that we can try and stop this cycle of housing instability and instead create a cycle of safe housing equity. So finally, I want to provide you with more of an illustration of what I mean around that. And this was my trip to Afghanistan. I'm super hoping that this works too. This one's a little longer, so forgive me. It was so overwhelming to get into Kabul. I was so excited and scared and anxious about being there, really anticipating the 2 weeks ahead, and I had no idea what was going to happen. So it was a scary time, but it was also so full of possibility. I went to Kabul because I wanted to reconnect with my love for the work. I needed to get into a context that was completely different than what I've been dealing with so that I could understand again why this is so important. Just to be reconnected with that sense of sisterhood that I felt like I had lost. In the spring of 2012, I had met Shukriya Kaliki, the director of the Kabul Shelter for Women for Afghan Women. She was in the United States visiting shelter programs, including DASH, to learn about our work. It had been 7 years since I started DASH, and it had been an amazing journey to create programs for women and children escaping abuse. But in that process, I'd become so involved in the business of the organization, the fundraising and reports, I felt like I had lost my connection to the movement, the global movement to end violence against women. I realized that I might have an opportunity to see a different way of doing things, and I wanted to connect with that. So I decided to go to Kabul. I am going to need someone to translate. Thank you for being willing to meet with me. Thank you all. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm going to videotape you. The women that I met with expressed such similar wishes to the women that I've worked with for so long here in the US. They said things to me like, we're not bad women. We just want to be able to lead our lives in a way that's safe and take care of our families. The differences that I saw of the women that I met with in the programs there was the extent and severity of the abuse that they'd suffered. I saw injuries unlike what I typically see in our shelter programs. Women who had acid thrown on their face, a woman whose face had been sliced open with a knife, a woman who'd been shot in the back, another woman who'd had her fingernails ripped out. The severity of the abuse was horrific. And yet, what the women said to me was so similar, just that they were so grateful to have a place that was safe, where they could learn to take care of themselves and their families, and that they just wanted to be able to lead their lives. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? The thing that impressed me was how many of the women I spoke to talked about how their work would make Afghanistan a better country.
There was really a broad sense that when women had access to the full range of human rights, housing and education and incomes and safety and healthcare, that it made everyone in Afghanistan better off. I walked away understanding that women need to have access to all of their human rights, that when they're able to fully participate in our world and really contribute their best, then our world is better for it. I just want to make sure that the women that we work with have that same opportunity as the women in Afghanistan are seeking. All right. So that is, that's the end of my presentation. Do you all, I guess I'll stop sharing, and I would like to see everyone's faces. And if you all have questions, or Marca, I don't know if there are other questions that you have.
There are a number of questions in the chat, and I'm going to let some of them file in. I do want to pose a question to you, Peg, while I track these. You opened it up talking about resilience. You closed it talking about resilience. Mm-hmm. For you, you had to find resilience over and over and over again. What does resilience mean to you, and how do you do that? Because the work you do, let's face it, is extremely important, but also very difficult. Yes. So maybe you can, let's get a little bit inside of Peg. We just saw a bit of it, and then I'll go to what's in the chat. And I know that Quentin has been holding questions since the first 5 minutes of your presentation, so we'll let him talk at some point too.
That's so sweet. Thank you for asking. That's such a kind question. You know, you're right. It is incredibly demanding work. And I say to my staff often that I have burned out many times over. I think it's, you know, sort of like I said, that it's dynamic, right? That it is a process, and it's, you know, sort of sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and sometimes it's the reverse. The important part is to recognize when you're, you know, when you need to spend some time recovering, when you are overreacting to things and you need to get space. And, you know, and then part of the thing that I really enjoy is that whole reimagining, right? That whole, like, what could be different here? What, you know, what would give me more of a sense of fulfillment and creativity, and, you know, something that I'll learn more about and still be able to do the work that I love. So, you know, it's, I think, hopefully I never stop learning and being resilient. I always want to be able to move forward.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm sure everybody appreciates the honesty there. So a question from Margaret O'Brien. Hi, Margaret. Do you have data on where your DASH residents land? Do they stay within DC, or do they move away? And does NASH help them? So for example, if you were to go out of the district, could they be then pulled in by somebody from within the NASH network, I think is the question.
Most of them, from my, it's been a while since I've looked at the exit data on our the residents in DASH. But I believe most of them end up staying in the DMV, right? So within DC or the surrounding suburbs. The huge challenge has been finding affordable housing for them, which, as I'm sure you know, like DC and many other major cities, the cost of living is just astronomical and getting worse. And then, with the pandemic, it's been especially bad. So we always tried to help the women that we worked with to find other places to go if they had connections and they felt like it would be safe for them to move, and we would support them to do that. NASH, we've done a little work with other, like sort of helping to facilitate those kinds of transfers, but really we're just more focused on connecting the programs to each other so that they can network amongst themselves. So we do sort of less of that facilitation.
Okay. From Larry Jones, with our withdrawal from Afghanistan, what do you believe the hope is for the future?
I'm really worried. Interestingly, when I was there was in 2013, right after Obama had announced that the troop withdrawal that was supposed to happen in 2014. And so when I went, one of the first questions I asked everyone I spoke to was, what are you going to do with the troop withdrawal, and what happens if the Taliban take power? And everyone was incredibly worried about it. And in fact, Shukriya, the woman that I talk about in that segment, actually did have to flee because she was living with her family, and the sort of popular story, because of course she couldn't say that she ran a shelter for abused women, that just wasn't accepted. So the popular story in her community was that she was running a brothel. And so when things became unsafe, she had to leave. And she did flee to Pakistan for a number of years, and then was able to return to another position and continue doing social service work, primarily with children. But I'm deeply worried about what's going to happen there next year or this year. I think the women who have the means will leave. They will go to Iraq or Pakistan, and the others will be subjected to the conditions as they will be.
A question from Charlie Bell about the relationship between DASH and local government agencies. So are you partnering with police departments, departments of welfare, public social workers, et cetera? Is that a challenge? How do you make that integration and partnership happen?
Well, DASH was funded primarily by the DC Office of Victim Services, and actually the way in which we were able to purchase the building and renovate it and run it was because of partnerships that we had with the Housing Finance Agency and the Department of Housing and Community Development. And then we were members of many of, we did a lot of work with, the city council and the Metropolitan Police Department and the DC public schools, because, domestic violence in housing doesn't occur in isolation, right? It impacts every area of, someone's life, and especially if they've become homeless. And so we want to be able to connect them to all of the resources that they might need to be able to move forward.
Wonderful. And Dina, thank you for asking this question. Peg, it's about what led you on this journey. How did you get into this, very important profession? And I know a little bit of the back channel. For those of you not aware, I was in the 5 College Valley the same time Peg was. So we got to see each other when we were, I don't know if that was sophomore year, junior year, something like that in college. It's a bit of a blur. So you were doing some very important work at UMass. And if I recall, that led you and launched you into this, but I'm sure the rest of the group would love to hear that story. So Dina, thank you for asking that.
I have to say, and I am not just sort of blowing smoke here, but that when we were in Mercersburg and I was taking AP English, my like senior year, and oh God, his name is totally going to escape me right now. But our English teacher had, given us an assignment to write an essay about Hamlet. It's not going to make any sense, but stay with me. So we were tasked to write an essay about not Mr. Chase. It was Weinbrenner. Yes, thank you.
I was about to ask Larry to come off of mute to tell us who it was, but I think it was Weinbrenner.
Yes, it was. And so he told us to write, we could pick any topic that we wanted to write about that had to do with Hamlet. And I remember sort of thinking at the time, like, how am I going to come at this issue in a way that makes sense for me? And I thought, well, I'm a woman. I should focus on one of the women in the story. And so I wrote an essay, like my I think it was like a term paper, was about why does Ophelia go crazy? And I had written this paper, and I remember Mr. Weinbrenner came up to me one day, like out of the blue, and he said, I'm really enjoying your paper. And I kind of went, oh my God, like, I never get that kind of feedback. But it really, like, it sort of sent a message that, like, I might have some insights or something to say about, like, women and, sort of what women experience. And so then you're right, Marca, when I was in college at UMass, I was volunteering for the local shelter hotline, and got a taste for the first time of, working with survivors. And I think the thing that just inspired me so much is the strength that these survivors have, that, like I said, they're always trying to make their lives better. They never give up. And even though, we may not know what it is that they're like, what plans they're putting in place or resources that they're gathering to try to make their lives better, they're always working towards it. And that just has always inspired me.
I love the way you brought it back to Mercersburg, because I think for all of us who are engaged and proud graduates, there is some kind of connection that has helped us launch PEG. So I'm sure all of our teachers are happy to hear about them. Quentin, I know you're itching to speak. Do you want to come up? You can ask your question.
Actually, Peg, that was amazing. And it's funny, my questions were, how do you think Mercersburg played into your decisions in your career? And what was your catalyst and what compelled you to get into this? And so really thrilled that you shared that. And I asked a question there. Just curious, what are the terms for residents at DASH? How do you evaluate? And then what are the expectations, if any, for your residents, just as a sort of loose guidelines for them? And just very curious about that. It's such an amazing program.
Thank you. I mean, we were so careful about constructing the program in such a way that we weren't, sort of like I said in that other clip, not really concerned with trying to, churn out model citizens. So we tried not to sort of hold every person to the same standards, because we really understand that each survivor's situation is different, and the kinds of services and resources and support that she needs is going to have to be different too. And so, whereas I worked in a lot of shelters where it really was sort of cookie cutter, right? You need to get a job, you need to find another place to live, you need to get counseling, you need to get a legal protection order. And we didn't do that at DASH because, again, we just knew that wasn't right for a lot of survivors. So the way that we measured success was based on what is it that each survivor wants to accomplish during her time in the program, and has she been able to accomplish it? And so it really looked different for everybody. But at the end of the day, I think they really appreciated just being treated as individuals and not being expected to sort of live up to some kind of like standard that they didn't think they could meet.
sounds like a preservation of an element of dignity there that's really critical in that experience.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask, I think, probably a rather obvious question in terms of how do people get involved to help support the DASH and NASH initiatives, and and thinking about this amazing Mercersburg community, and are there ways in which people can be more invested in through time or treasure in the work that you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. So I can post in the chat the websites for both DASH and NASH as soon as I can pull up the chat. And if you're in the DC area, DASH is always looking for volunteers. They get a lot of help from folks, both who, come and work with the children, and, as well as, we would have volunteers come in to offer all kinds of things to the families. We do a Thanksgiving Day thing where we have essentially a huge grocery shop, and they can come and they get a basket and they can fill it with all the vegetables and potatoes and whatever stuffing, and then we give them a gift card to go to the grocery store to get a turkey. We do a similar thing at Christmas. And so you can always, always, always donate that kind of stuff to DASH. And then, we would have a lot of volunteers come in and offer, Zumba or art classes or resume writing, or, offer accounting advice or legal advice if that was their background. So I know that, DASH was always really looking for just people to offer whatever their skills were. With NASH, it's a little different, right? Because we're really focused on working with communities and programs and helping to build out those kinds of systems and options for survivors. So, if you're interested in, working, if you know of a program or a government or, a community group that's interested in hearing more about the kinds of steps and measures that can be taken to improve safe housing options for survivors, we would be happy to provide that kind of support. We also accept donations, so you're welcome to go to our website and do that as well. I will never turn down money, but we're really looking to just be able to, create safe housing for everyone.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And Jen, I hope we can make sure that everyone gets those links in a follow-up perhaps, so people can have that on hand. And I think about our young alumni and our graduates are heading to DC and doing some of those things, and what a wonderful way for them to be involved and connected to a great initiative from a Mercersburg alumna. So those are my questions. I know that I could probably come up with 1,000 more. This is really, really neat work. So thank you for answering those.
I think we've probably got time, Quentin, for maybe one more. Peg, there's one from Jason Barshatsky. First of all, thanks you for sharing the work. And is reducing domestic violence one of the goals of DASH, or are there some research that shows that organizations such as yours can indirectly lead to the overall ending, if it's not just the reduction? What I guess, Jason, I'm going to paraphrase here, but what exactly, when you think about your North Star, you talked about the resilience and helping women survive, but is there maybe another one beyond that?
Right. Our North Star, if you will, when I started doing the work, we always used to say, we're going to put ourselves out of business. That's the aim, is to end violence against women. That's a tall order. And I don't see that sort of happening anytime soon, but I do think that if we can end homelessness for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, then we are, in a way, stopping them from becoming future victims, stopping, their children from being exposed to violence, and really, sort of disrupting the cycle in that way. So my aim is really to make sure that that when we talk about safe housing, that it's making sure that everyone has a place that is safe and stable and self-determining wherever or however that looks. And that all of us really, right? I mean, not just survivors, but we all deserve that. And so that's really what I would like to see happen in my lifetime.
That's wonderful. Are there any other questions from the group? I'm not seeing anything else pop up. Jane, you had a comment. I'm not sure if there was a question there. Did you want to come off mute? Was there a specific comment you wanted or a question you wanted to ask? Jane Sellery? Okay, she's not coming. I just wanted to give her a chance. So one final question for you, Peg. When you think about the year that we've been in, the past 14 months, and there's safe housing in a domestic abuse environment, and then there's just staying safe in a global pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. How have those two things come together, and how have you managed that with your organization?
Well, and so when the pandemic first sort of officially hit in March, I think everybody, was reacting, right? And, like everybody was kind of freaking out going, what do we do? What do we do? And suddenly we started getting just panicked phone calls from programs all over the country because, they had shelters that they were being asked to increase social distancing within their programs, to put PPE and other kinds of public health measures in place. And a lot of these programs didn't know the first thing about how to do that. So what ended up happening was that a lot of the shelter programs across the country had to really diminish their capacity in order to accommodate these public health measures, which meant that there was suddenly fewer places for survivors to escape to. At the same time, what was happening, because survivors were being asked to shelter in place with abusive partners, the rates of reports of domestic violence were skyrocketing. And so I imagine you've seen reports all over of how just calls to hotlines increased dramatically over the last year. And at the same time, these shelters were unable to, serve the survivors in their own programs, and they were trying to accommodate social distancing and remote work for their own staff. So it really became sort of a perfect storm of circumstances that made it very difficult for survivors to find a safe, even more difficult for survivors to find a safe place to go. A lot of shelter programs have had to adopt different kinds of measures to better help survivors, meeting them in the communities, providing them with cash assistance so that they can overcome a financial hurdle that might be a result of domestic or sexual violence. A lot of shelters that, were asking survivors and residents to quit their jobs. I mean, it was just getting crazy. And so we did everything we could in the ensuing months to provide as much guidance and support to programs to say, here's how you can creatively work with survivors. Go meet them someplace in the community and bring them cleaning supplies or PPE, just so that you can check in with them and make sure that they're safe. So it's been a challenge for everybody. And then, of course, with the economy tanking, domestic violence always goes up during an economic recession. So that has made the pressure even more challenging, and programs I've got to say, the advocates that I know who work in programs are amazing, and they will always, it's like the women that I saw in Afghanistan, they will always step up to meet the challenges under the worst conditions.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate all of the insight and knowledge that you've shared with us, Peg. Your journey has been amazing, and it's never enough time. And I'm certain I speak for everybody on the phone that your videos were just very, very powerful. So thank you for sharing. And
well, thank you guys all so much. And it's been such a pleasure. Yeah, it's great to see you, Margaret.
And so I'm going to turn it back to Quentin as the master of ceremonies here on behalf of the school. So thank you again, Peg, and thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I realized, Marca, that I forgot to do your proper introduction, but suffices to say that Marca is amazing and has been an incredible advocate for the school, an ambassador for Mercersburg Academy and for her classmates and for our alumni and alumna. So thank you, Marca, so much for being a part of this. And Peg, how wonderful. And, you know, coming off a year where our theme is making a difference, it is incredibly perfect that that we had you here tonight to share your story and the work that you do. And it is with great pride that we get to sit and listen to you talk about what you've done. And so thank you. And thanks for making a difference for our communities and for the world and for the women who really need it most and are often the least helped. So thank you so much. And we know we do a lot of virtual events. We've had so many amazing virtual events, thanks to our events team and Denise Bennett, who's on tonight, and to Jen Bradley, class of 99, and Holly Trossel. And so really grateful for the team that is here tonight that really supports and underpins these programs. We hope that you will keep going to mercersburg.edu/events to continue to see what else is on the docket for the upcoming weeks and months and year ahead. We want to make sure we're engaging you thoughtfully and keeping you abreast of what's going on, not just here at school, but with our incredible alumni. And so wanted to make sure that I just say thank you for taking the time and spending your evening with us. And I'm thinking that a lot of people will be really sad that they missed this, Peg. And so thank you again. And really wonderful to see everyone, and nice to see some really fun, familiar faces and familiar names. And hopefully we'll all get you back on campus soon when the dust settles, and keep doing the good work. And we'll make sure to send along those links so people know how they might be able to contribute meaningfully to your initiatives and programs. They certainly seem well worth the time and energy. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. Marca and Peg in particular, thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.